Hello, my friends. Welcome to Quartet. John Petersen's my name from the Arlington Institute. And we do this every 2 weeks. We come together to talk about the deep kind of issues that are related to the extraordinary kind of change, the amazing kind of transition that's going on in the world today. So let's go to our topic for today. As has been suggested by some of these comments, there have been a lot of folks who have been interested in how we might respond to current events. And so we've decided in the face of all of this change that's going on around us that we would chat about that a little bit today. And I thought I'd set this up by just kind of building a big picture, at least from my point of view, about what's happening here. There are a variety of people, including our current president, Joe Biden, who back in 2012 gave speeches and said, the most sensitive aspect between the United States and Russia is Ukraine, and we should never let them into, or even talk about them being into NATO, because that's the thing that's going to turn this thing into a war. And the one who has been most pointed in talking about what the implications of this are is Vladimir Putin. He has over and over and over again, over these years, the last 8-10 years, talked about this encroachment that NATO was doing. And by the way, he was promised in no uncertain terms, that Russia was, that there would be no addition to NATO. He is aware, and it's now become public, that they were building their own nuclear weapon in Ukraine. It's aggravated by the fact that there are 30 now identified bioweapons laboratories that the United States and NATO has put on in Ukraine. And I forgot to mention that the Donbass and the other province, which are all Russian, 98% are Russian and Russian speaking, were being bombed on a regular basis for the last 8 years. 17,000 people estimated have been killed by the bombing from the Iranians. The general kind of assessment of the people that I deal with say that the Americans are largely directing all of this, and that they have, and that Martin Armstrong, for instance, says they want a war. They need a war. They need this because it's this diversionary thing that takes it away from a couple of the things I'll mention just here in a minute. Caitlin Johnstone from Australia writes, just your regular reminder that the US empire, number A, had solid intelligence as this war was coming. B, knew they could prevent it by making very reasonable low-cost concessions, like promising not to add a nation to NATO that they didn't want to add. And C, chose not to do so. And her kind of money quote here is, it's 2022 and people still believe the US is pouring weapons into a foreign country to protect freedom and democracy. It's like being 57 and still believing in the tooth fairy. Okay, and so what they're doing is muddying the waters, right? This is a campaign that's got these different kind of initiatives, and this is only one of a number of them. Because at the same time, what you've got is a major senior Beijing advisor who's promoting reunification law amongst the Taiwan tensions. So they're taking advantage of it. So on the other side of the world, you got, multiple things you got to deal with. And at the same time, what they're doing across the board, they started in Canada, is that they're making a move against cryptocurrencies. And the United States is now yesterday shut off any kind of crypto relationships with Russia. Coinbase shut off 25,000 accounts in Russia for cryptos, and people who are thought that they had security and all of this are suddenly watching their whole accounts go away. And so there are multiple ways. The WHO is moving very, very quickly, and it's got multiple countries that are lined up for a global vaccine passport, which is the beginning of complete total control, if that ever goes into place. All of these sanctions are just, if nothing else, are playing directly into this effort to just drive down and drop the economy so that they can do a big reset.
I agree. One of the things I've seen the last 2 weeks is it's hard to know what's true because many of the YouTube videos of suffering, of civilian casualties, and things like that are from other wars
Yeah.
that were earlier, and some of them aren't even in Eastern Europe. Some of them are from the Middle East. So there's a propaganda war that is going on. What I'm looking at, John, I'm a systems scientist, I'm a systems thinker. I'm looking at the big picture. In chaos theory, when a system goes from one state to the next state, there are phases that it has to go through, and that's in physics. Virginia Satir created a very similar kind of system to identify social change. In Virginia Satir's system, there are 4 phases. There's the old status quo, which we have been in, and then there are what she calls foreign elements. So these are the events like COVID, the events like a war that begin to change that status quo, and it goes into chaos. And from that chaos, we have transforming ideas that lead to some kind of integration and ultimately a new status quo. What's interesting to me, John, is that in chaos theory, this is not a linear process. All of these phases can be happening at the same time. There are elements of status quo that are still intact. Foreign elements, they're incoming and they're ongoing. And there is a degree of chaos now, and I think we're about to see a lot more of that chaos. This is where this program and the things that we're doing and others are important, because in the chaos, from the chaos, we have to, the transforming ideas emerge from within the chaos. World Economic Forum, who is they're the authors of the Great Reset, 2019, they signed an agreement with the United Nations to implement many of these through what's called the Sustainable Development Goals, which sound beautiful until you read the fine print of how we get to those goals. So if we are not developing these systems, as the systems break down, we're going to see a sweeping revision. They're going to come in and say, hey, we've got a great deal for you that's going to fix all of this. But before that can happen, we've got to have so much chaos, so much turmoil, so much suffering that people are asking and open to that. The big thing, the diversion that nobody's talking about now, the U.S. is re-engaging Iran. And the nuclear deal. That nuclear deal excludes the uranium coming from Russia. Russia can send as much uranium as they want into Iran, but here's the kicker. That nuclear deal says that the United States is legally bound to defend Iranian nuclear reactors from Israel. So if Israel decides to take out a reactor, it pits the U.S. against Israel. It's a bad deal, and they're re-engaging that. Nobody's talking about it because that's part of the diversion.
To give a perspective on this, I'd like to kind of clarify different, let's say, scales of understanding. For the sake of clarity, let's call them 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, and 4-dimensional. To start off with the 2-dimensional, this is the realm of geopolitics. And exactly what you've outlined, John, about the NATO encroachment has been going on for years. They've gone back on the Bucharest Agreement, the Minsk Agreement, and also the Anglo-American establishment through the American Foreign Office and the CIA orchestrated, financed, and helped with the coups in Ukraine. In the game of geopolitics, Eastern Europe is known as the world island, and it represents the pivot between the West and Eurasia. And what's happening now is that the geopolitics are shifting to a Eurasian power structure. And in the middle is Germany. And Germany's been very quiet about their alliances. Now, the Chinese beltway, as we know, their Silk Road beltway, which is a rail, air, and sea road kind of network infrastructure. Where does the Silk Road end in Europe? It ends in Germany. Where do the 2 Nord Stream pipelines coming from Russia end? They end in Germany. why were the Western powers so keen to destabilize Germany and Russia in World War I in the Bolshevik Revolution? Because they know any alliance in Eurasia between Russia and Germany is going to strengthen the multipolar pact. Now, in 1996, there was the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They started to set up an economic agreement as well as a trade agreement. That now includes India, Iran. So any trade or any type of energy trade agreements have to first give priority to the Shanghai Organization Pact. And so that now includes 3.5 million people. That's half the world's population. So already Eurasia is so powerful. It has its own SWIFT networks, has its own, say, financial networks. The West now is, I think, feeling this shift of power and losing their unipolar power over the world. If we go to 3D, what we call a three-dimensional, this is the Great Reset agenda. This is the part where you can't take sides because all sides are playing a similar game. Even Putin's been very close with the Davos crowd. He was with the World Economic Forum Young Leaders Group. He knew Klaus Schwab from his early days in St. Petersburg when he was a politician, before he came to power. He's very well entangled. And this is not about a war on the ground so much. This is a financial, energy, and resources kind of war, which is all piling into this Great Reset, which is basically going towards a technocratic tyranny. On a 3D level, these players are just orchestrated enemies. They're working towards a global Great Reset. On a fourth dimensional level, this is where we step outside of the reality construct, and we see that there's huge changes happening cosmically through the solar system and across the planet. There's energy shifts within the planet, within the core of the planet, shift in energy lines across the planet. And this is where we tie into these great precessional cycles that we've talked about previously, and I know Gregg's talked about, and these great 26,000 year cycles where, this is where a new world can come into being, because, there's cosmic winds are blowing that we're not aware of. But there's a rush between the 2D level, the 2D programming, the 3D programming, but there's things happening beyond this kind of reality construct. So if we can distinguish between them, I think we can help us not to get entangled in the 2D programming, understand the 3D global perspective, but put our understanding, comprehension in the 4D complete change that's going to happen across this planet as we go to a complete restructuring, John. That's the kind of breakdown there.
I see this as the next big move by the powers that be to implement this Great Reset. The first big move being the whole COVID thing. And the question that's left dangling from the COVID thing that hasn't been answered is, do we have the right to say, you're not putting that in my body? Because if that is not answered and that's left dangling, then the whole question of, do we have the right to say, no, you're not taking that out of my body, which is something that you see when you go over and you look at what's happening with the Uyghurs in at the western end of China. They are having things removed from their bodies against their will. Putin has been suckered in the same way, using just what you were saying, John. They're moving men and missiles closer and closer to the Russian borders. And, the Russians are saying, no, you're not putting that stuff. The agreement was you're not going to go any further east than the Elbe River in Germany. And now they're way the heck over into Ukraine. And I've seen some of the things that you were talking about, pictures of people from other wars. And then there's the whole body bag thing. The guy who's filming the body bags. We have 57 people dead here, and the wind blows. And one of the body bags opens up, and the body inside reaches up and pulls the bag back down. They didn't shut off the electricity. They didn't go in and, shut down communications. They didn't do any of that. They didn't shut down the internet. Why? Well, yeah, maybe Putin is trying to do something different, But we're still, up until I think a week in, we were still buying oil from them. And we're still, their internet is still working. It's like, okay, this doesn't really look much like a war. So when you then realize nothing happens, Putin goes a little deeper, and then all of a sudden, boom, boom, the whole international corporate cabal comes down on him. Everything's shut off. He's out of the SWIFT system. They reversed the decision in Germany. All news about Russia from Russia is cut off. So all we have is propaganda. So we have the first operation dangling there with all these questions about our rights. And now we have this, this whole situation with the Ukraine. And I think the goal is to crush Russia as a nation, and China will be next. And the US is going down at the same time Russia does. And the whole thing is being orchestrated by the same people out of Israel who have the Ukraine as their homeland. You know, they're not from the Semites in Syria or wherever that is down there, you know, by the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers. That whole group is from Ukraine, and they want their homeland back. That's what they see, is this is going to be the center of the planet. And we're going to run everything from here. All of the big corporations are involved in the same way that the big corporations were involved in the COVID thing. It's the next big move. I don't know if there's a third one, but we are in the trap right now.
So number one, both Martin Armstrong and Cliff High say that their data says that this is not going to be successful, this large thing. And so that's a positive kind of possibility on the back end of this.
Yeah, and the central bank digital currency thing, I don't think people have enough understanding of cryptocurrencies, digital currencies, to understand the difference between those currencies that are really independent and the ones that are coming from the central bank. And the central bank is like, come on, we'll give you all your money that you lost in this banking collapse in a central bank digital currency. And you can only pull out so much. It'll be like an ATM limit, $200 a day. That's it. Yeah. And you've lost. We were then Glenn Beck calls it, we're in a digital cage.
I mean, think what would happen if China, Russia, the US, India, and Iran, if we came together and said, you know, the old system worked and it's no longer working. We care about our people. Let's build a new system together. Think how different that would look.
They say to play the game, you should not play it, but I would disagree. I would say to play the game, you should play it better, play it well. And the only way to play it well is through conscious awareness and aligning and resonating with a new pattern of consciousness and understanding that this may be painful, but we are going through a historic moment for the human species, and it will survive, it will thrive, and we will get to where we need to be eventually.
And so thank you, those of you who've been watching this. We appreciate you being a part of our community and keeping track of us and sending us questions and all of that. We hope you'll recommend Quartet and punch the like button and share and all of those kinds of things, because that all helps get the word out and provide what we think is an alternative kind of way in which to look at all of this change and try to help prepare ourselves and to understand what's going on.